music was still swelling, string quartet doing some modern cover of a pop song, all soft and golden under the fairy lights when he grabbed me. 1 second, I was adjusting the strap of my dress, trying to catch my breath near the service corridor where no one would see me crying. And the next, his hand clamped around my upper arm like a vice, fingers digging so deep I felt the bones shift. "You're embarrassing your sister," he hissed, voice low enough that only I could hear. But his eyes were wild, scanning the crowd to make sure no one was watching, except someone was. Always is. He shoved me backward hard, and my shoulder hit the marble wall beside the coat check, with a crack that echoed louder than I expected. It wasn't just impact, it was surrender. My head snapped back, and for a split second, everything went white. The laughter from the cocktail hour, the clink of ice in crystal glasses, the distant hum of the DJ testing microphones, it all vanished. All I saw was his jaw, clenched like he was holding back worse, and the way his wedding ring caught the light as it pressed into my collarbone. "Smile," he whispered, smoothing my hair with the same hand that had just pinned me there. "People are looking." And they were. I saw it in the frozen pause of a bridesmaid mid-laugh, in the way my cousin's phone dipped slightly as she pretended to check a text, but kept recording. I saw it in my sister's face across the courtyard, her bouquet trembling, her smile cracking like thin ice. She knew. She always knew. But this was her day, and I'd promised I wouldn't ruin it. So I swallowed the sob rising in my throat, straightened my spine, and forced my lips into something that might pass for joy. That's the thing about our family. You don't fall apart. You hold the shape, even when you're hollow inside. What no one saw in that moment was the decade behind it. The way he'd corrected me since I was 12 for speaking too loudly, for wearing pants to church, for getting a college acceptance letter he called unnecessary. He called it love, called it leadership, called it keeping the family name clean. But it was control, polished to a shine, and wrapped in scripture and Sunday suits. And I'd played along, because the alternative being cut off, called ungrateful, erased from photos and family trees, felt like death. But then came the video. It surfaced on a niche family drama forum 48 hours later. Just 12 seconds. No context, no audio, just shaky footage from a high angle. My father in his navy tux, me in pale blush silk, his hand on my arm, my back against the wall, my face a mask of shock. Someone had uploaded it with the caption, "Father corrects daughter at wedding, WTF is happening here." Within hours, it was everywhere. Shared by domestic violence advocates, debated on news segments, viewed, liked, dissected. 5 million views before the week was out. To strangers, it was a mystery. To me, it was the first time the world saw what I'd spent years trying to prove, that love shouldn't leave bruises on your soul, that a father's hand shouldn't feel like a threat. And that day, beneath the chandeliers and champagne flutes, I stopped pretending. Because once the truth is out there, you can't tuck it back into a pocket like a spare button. You either run from it, or you pick it up, hold it high, and say, "This is mine, and I'm not ashamed." I sat in my car 2 days after the wedding, parked in the empty lot of a 24-hour pharmacy, rain tapping softly on the windshield like the world was trying to be gentle with me. My dress was still in a dry cleaning bag on the passenger seat, wrinkled and smelling faintly of spilled Prosecco and my own sweat. I hadn't slept. My arm still ached where his fingers had dug in. But worse than that was the ringing in my ears, the echo of his voice whispering, "No one will believe you. You'll look crazy." And for a moment, I almost believed him. But then my phone buzzed, not with a call, not with a text from family demanding I apologize for the scene, but with a notification. My video had been shared by a nonprofit that supports adult survivors of family-based emotional abuse. I opened it, trembling, and scrolled through the comments. Not the usual wedding gossip or OMG, so awkward takes. No, this was different. Me too. My dad did this at my graduation. I stayed silent for 20 years because I thought it was discipline. You didn't ruin her wedding. He did the moment he put his hands on you. I started crying, real, ugly crying right there in the driver's seat. Not because I was hurt, but because I wasn't alone. For the first time in my life, the thing I'd been told was in my head had a name, a pattern, a chorus of voices saying, "We see you." So I hit record on my phone, propped it on the steering wheel, and spoke before I could talk myself out of it. My voice cracked, but I kept going. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive for noticing what's wrong, if you've ever been punished for setting a boundary at a happy event, comment, "Me too." You don't have to prove your pain to deserve peace. I posted it raw, no filters, no script, just me in a hoodie I'd borrowed from my roommate. Mascara smudged under one eye, holding a travel mug of cold coffee like it was a lifeline. Within an hour, replies poured in. Stories of uncles who joked too hard, mothers who weaponized guilt, siblings who looked away. One woman wrote, "I watched my brother shove my sister at Thanksgiving dinner. We all pretended it was a hug. You just gave us permission to stop lying." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about me and my father. It was about an entire culture that treats family violence as a private matter, something to be smoothed over with cake and congratulations. But trauma doesn't vanish because the DJ plays a slow song. And silence isn't loyalty, it's complicity dressed in pearls. Still, doubt crept back in. What if I was overreacting? What if the video was taken out of context? That's when my phone chimed again, a DM from an account with a vintage photo of an old woman in a floral dress. Username, at me, Everett 1936. It was my great-aunt Me, Dad's aunt, who'd lived 3 states away, and whom I'd only met twice. The message read, "I saw that clip. That wasn't discipline. That was fear." And then a photo attachment, a yellowed Polaroid from 1987. My mother, maybe 22, standing in front of our old house, her left eye shadowed, her smile tight. On the back, in faded ink, after the discussion about grad school. L. My breath caught. Aunt Me had never said a word about my mother's accidents or sudden migraines that always followed family dinners. But now one image, she'd handed me a key to a past I'd been told never happened, to a truth I'd been gaslit into forgetting. I stared at that photo for a long time, rain streaking the windshield like tears. The sky was crying for us both, and I realized the real story wasn't the shove at the wedding. It was the decades of shoves no one filmed. The quiet erosion of a woman's voice, repeated across generations, until someone finally said, "No more." I saved the photo, made 3 backups, and whispered, "Okay, Grandma, I'm listening." But I had no idea that photo was just the first thread, and that pulling it would unravel everything. Our family didn't wear its secrets on its sleeve. We stitched them into the seams. Literally. For as long as I could remember, buttons were our quiet language. Not the flashy kind, but the small, unassuming ones. Mother of pearl from my great-grandmother's trousseau. Brass military insignias from my grandfather's service uniform. Tiny, jet-black toggles from the coat my mother wore the day she buried her own father. We passed them down not as heirlooms for display, but as talismans, tiny anchors to a lineage that prided itself on composure, on never letting the inside show. At every major event, baptisms, graduations, weddings, some variant of the family button appeared. My sister wore one on her garter the day she married. My father still had the original cufflink from his wedding day, though my mother's matching set had mysteriously vanished after their last big fight. I kept one in my pocket always, a smooth ivory disc from a coat I'd never seen, given to me by my grandmother when I left for college. "If you feel lost," she'd said, "touch it. Remember who you come from." I used to think she meant the dignity, the legacy. Now I wonder if she meant the silence. That wedding day, I'd sewn a single pearl button onto the inside of my dress, just below the left shoulder, hidden, but close to my heart. A quiet nod to tradition, a promise to hold myself together. But when he slammed me into the wall, the force tore the seam. I felt it give a small, sharp pop, like a thread snapping under pressure no one else could see. Later, in the restroom stall, I lifted the fabric and saw it. The button missing, the lining frayed, a raw edge where something meant to hold had finally let go. It struck me then how perfectly the button mirrored our family dynamic. On the outside, polished, matched, secure. A flawless facade held together by tiny, delicate fastenings. But inside, strained, mended with invisible thread, worn thin in the places no one looked. And if you pulled too hard just once, in public, with witnesses, the whole thing could come undone. I used to believe that maintaining that outer shell was my duty. That if I just stayed quiet, kept smiling, fastened my emotions tight like a proper blouse, I could preserve the peace. But peace built on suppression isn't peace, it's performance. And that day, when the camera light flickered on and the world saw my face pale, wide-eyed, caught mid-collapse, I didn't feel exposed. I felt released, because the truth was already out. The button was gone. The seam had ripped. And for the first time, I didn't reach to hide it. Now, every time I pass a tailor shop, or see a jar of loose buttons at a thrift store, I don't just see hardware. I see choices. Who gets to fasten? Who gets to stay closed? And who finally dares to unbutton, even if it means the whole garment falls open for everyone to see. That night, after everyone had left the venue, I walked back through the empty courtyard alone. The chairs were stacked, the cake gone, the fairy lights still glowing like ghosts. I knelt by the spot where I'd hit the wall and searched the marble baseboard with my fingers. And there, wedged in a crack near the skirting, I found it, my mother's pearl button. Chipped on one edge, but intact. I closed my hand around it and didn't let go, because some things aren't meant to be sewn back in. Some things are meant to be held and remembered. People always said my father had presence, walked into a room like he owned the air in it, commanded silence without raising his voice. At family reunions, he'd sit at the head of the table, fingers steepled, and offer quiet pronouncements that somehow became law by the time dessert was served. That cousin's new partner isn't serious. Don't invite them next year. Your niece doesn't need art school. It's a hobby, not a career. She's too emotional, needs discipline. He never shouted. He didn't have to. His authority was woven into every birthday card, every holiday toast, every for your own good decision made without consultation. And for years, I mistook control for care. It started subtly after Mom died. I was 17, raw and unmoored, and he stepped in as both parent and patriarch. He managed her estate, what little was left after medical bills, and simplified things by consolidating everything under his name to avoid confusion. He said I'd get my share when I was responsible enough. At first, I didn't question it. Grief made me pliable, but then came the conditions. If I wanted to apply to out-of-state colleges, I'd need to prove I could contribute. So I worked double shifts at a diner all summer, only to be told the trust fund was temporarily restricted due to market volatility. When I brought home my first serious girlfriend's senior year, he didn't yell. He just stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks, then announced at Sunday dinner, "She's going through a phase. Don't encourage it." My sister, ever the peacemaker, would whisper, "Just nod, go along, he'll forget." But he never forgot. He remembered every deviation from his script. When I chose journalism over law school, a field for gossip mongers, he called it, he froze tuition payments and told relatives I was throwing away my potential. When I questioned why my sister's wedding budget was triple what was allocated for my graduate housing, he smiled and said, "She understands family loyalty. You're still learning." The message was clear. Obedience earned protection, independence earned exile. And the worst part, he made it feel like love. "I'm hard on you because I believe in you," he'd say, hand on my shoulder after a scolding. Someone has to keep you grounded. The weddings, the funerals, the holiday dinners, they weren't celebrations. They were performance reviews, stages where he could publicly affirm his version of order while privately punishing dissent. A tight hug that lingered just long enough to whisper a threat. A toast that praised my sister's grace while glancing pointedly at my restlessness. And always, always, the unspoken ledger. Who had pleased him, who had got disappointed, who was in or out of favor. By the time of my sister's wedding, I'd learned to wear compliance like a second skin. I RSVP'd, yes, even though my chest tightened at the thought of standing near him. I bought the dress he suggested. I practiced smiling in the mirror until it looked real, because the cost of defiance wasn't just his anger, it was the family's rejection. The way aunts would suddenly forget to invite me to baby showers. The way uncles would change the subject if I walked into a room. I'd seen what happened to the cousin who sued him over a disputed inheritance, erased from family photos, spoken of only in hushed, cautionary tones. Poor Daniel. So bitter. So I stayed small, quiet, grateful for crumbs. But that day, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he looked at my sister during the ceremony, not with pride, but with ownership, like she was a successful project finally delivered. Maybe it was the realization that if I didn't speak up now, I'd spend the rest of my life shrinking myself to fit his narrative. Or maybe it was simply that I was tired. Tired of pretending that love should hurt. Tired of measuring my worth by his approval. When he grabbed me, it wasn't just about that moment. It was the accumulation of every silenced opinion, every borrowed dream, every time I'd chosen peace over truth. And though my body froze against that wall, something inside me unfroze. A voice I thought I'd buried with my mother. It whispered, "You don't owe him your silence anymore." And for the first time, I listened. The morning after the video hit 5 million views, I woke to 17 missed calls, all from family members, whose names I hadn't heard in years. My phone buzzed like a trapped wasp, a chorus of panic and blame. "You've humiliated us. Take it down before the news picks it up. Your father is devastated." I turned it off, wrapped myself in the quilt my mother stitched before she got sick, and sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the radiator, too numb to move. The world outside my window kept turning, cars honking, dogs barking, neighbors laughing. But inside, I felt like I was floating in a vacuum, untethered from everything I'd ever known. Then at 9:03 a.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My roommate was out of town. I hadn't told a soul where I was staying since the wedding. Heart pounding, I peered through the peephole and saw a courier in a navy cap holding a padded envelope with no return address. My first thought was a cease and desist letter, maybe even a threat. But when I tore it open, the paper inside was thick, cream-colored, sealed with a red wax stamp stamped with a tiny M.E. in elegant script, Me Everett. Great Aunt Me. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was steady, looping, the kind you only see in people who still write real letters. Not emails, not texts, words committed to paper with intention. My dearest Aliner, asterisk. You'll always be Ellie to me, like your mother was. I saw the footage, and I saw him. The same look he gave your mother the night she came to my door with her eyes swollen shut and said, "It was the cabinet door, Aunt Me. I walked into it." I believed her then because I didn't know how to do otherwise. But I knew Oh, child, I knew. Tears blurred the ink. I had to blink them away to keep reading. After your mother passed, I wrote this letter not to send, but to bear witness. I sealed it, dated it, and gave a copy to Harold Baines, our family attorney in Cedar Ridge, with instructions to release it only if your father ever tried to control you the way he controlled her. I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet all these years. But silence is a slow poison, and I've watched it eat at our family long enough. Beneath the letter was a photocopy of a notarized affidavit, dated October 12, 2009, 3 months after my mother's funeral. In it, Aunt Me swore under penalty of perjury that she'd witnessed multiple incidents of verbal and financial coercion by my father during my parents' marriage, intercepting my mother's mail, restricting her access to bank accounts, threatening to cut her off from the children if she pursued her master's degree. One line made my breath catch. He told her, "No one will believe a hysterical woman over a respected man like me." And for too long, no one did. I sank to my knees right there in the hallway, the letter pressed to my chest like a shield. All my life, I'd carried the quiet shame of wondering if I was imagining things, overreacting, being dramatic, failing to see the love beneath the control. But here, in my great aunt's careful script, was proof that this wasn't new. It wasn't me. It was a pattern, a lineage of women silenced not by absence of voice, but by the crushing weight of expectation to be gracious, to preserve the family name, to forgive because he's all we have. And then came the real gift. I've spoken to Harold. He still has the original, and he remembers everything. If you're ready to stop carrying this alone, call him. Tell him me sent you. And Ellie, don't make my mistake. Don't wait until it's too late to speak. I sat there for a long time, sunlight creeping across the floorboards, warming the paper in my hands. For the first time, I didn't feel like the broken one. I felt like the continuation of something brave, something my mother and Aunt Me had tried to protect, even in their silence. Me hadn't just validated my pain. She'd handed me a key to a locked room I didn't even know existed. But with that key came a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Now that I knew the truth, what was I willing to do with it? I tucked the letter into the inside pocket of my coat right, where my missing pearl button used to be, and dialed the number at the bottom of the page. My voice didn't shake this time. "Hello," I said. "My name is Alina Evans. Aunt Me said you'd be expecting me." I didn't go to the police right away. Not because I doubted what happened, but because I'd been trained from childhood to solve things quietly, privately, without making waves. That instinct was so deep in my bones, I almost deleted the live stream link when my cousin, bless her, sent it to me with a shaky. I saved it before they took it down. But something stopped me. Maybe it was Aunt Me's letter still folded in my coat pocket, or the way my sister hadn't looked me in the eye since the wedding. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of editing yourself to fit someone else's narrative. so I downloaded the file. Not the viral clip everyone was sharing, the cropped, shaky, soundless 12 seconds, but the full, unedited wedding live stream, preserved on a private cloud folder my cousin had accessed through the venue's backup system. It was 47 minutes long, mostly footage of string quartets and guests mingling, but I watched it frame by frame, heart in my throat, until I found it. 32 minutes and 18 seconds in. There I was, near the arched alcove by the restrooms, fanning myself with a program, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest after my father cornered me during the cocktail hour and hissed, "If you mention the trust today, I'll make sure you never see another dime." The camera caught him turning away, adjusting his cufflinks, then circling back like a predator who'd scented weakness. At 32:42, he grabs my arm. At 32:45, he slams me into the wall. At 32:47, he leans in, mouth moving. And though the audio was muffled by distance and music, my lips were visible enough. "Say one word, and I'll cut you off forever." But the real proof wasn't just in the shove. It was in what happened next. At 32:52, as I stumble backward, trying to regain my footing, the wide-angle shot catches the wall behind me and the molding. A clean, straight dent, right at shoulder height where my back had hit. Not a scuff, not a smudge, a dent, deep enough that the venue's head of operations would later confirm in writing that it required drywall repair and repainting. I took a screenshot, high resolution, timestamp visible in the bottom corner, and saved it with a file name that left no room for doubt. Assault evidence, wall damage 061225. That evening, I walked into the local precinct, not in tears, not in a rage, but with a folder. Inside, the time-stamped screenshot, a printed still of the dent, a copy of Aunt Me's affidavit, and a concise statement written in my clearest, calmest voice. The officer behind the desk, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read R. Diaz, didn't interrupt. She listened. Then she asked, "Do you want to file a report?" I nodded. She handed me a form. I filled it out in pen. No erasures, no hesitations. When she logged the evidence into the system, she double-checked the timestamp against the venue's security logs, which, thankfully, time-synced with the live stream. "This is solid," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Clear sequence. No ambiguity." She stamped the report, gave me a case number, and said, "This stays on file. If you decide to press charges later, it's already documented." I left the station lighter than I'd been in years. Not because justice had been served, far from it, but because I'd broken the spell. For the first time, I hadn't hidden, explained away, or minimized. I'd treated my experience like a fact, not a flaw. And the system, cold and bureaucratic as it was, had accepted it as such. But as I walked to my car, phone buzzing again, with another urgent family group message, "We need damage control now," I knew this was just the beginning. The shove was the spark, but the real fire was still buried in bank statements, trust documents, and decades of financial control disguised as protection. And I was starting to suspect that the money, my mother's money, was the real reason he'd snapped that day. Because in our family, buttons fasten the fabric, but money writes the rules, and I was finally ready to read the fine print. 2 days after filing the police report, I walked into the family attorney's office, the same one who'd handled my mother's estate, dressing carefully in a navy blazer, and my mother's pearl earrings, as if armor could be borrowed. I'd rehearsed my request in the mirror, calm, precise, no emotion. I'd like a full accounting of the Eleanor Margaret Evans Education Trust, established in 2005, with distributions scheduled to begin upon my 25th birthday. I turned 25 in March. It was now June. Not a single disbursement had been made. My father had always blamed delays and paperwork, but after the wedding, after the shove, after Aunt Mee's letter, I couldn't unsee the pattern. The attorney, Mr. Callahan, was a man who'd known me since I was in pigtails, who'd patted my head at my mother's funeral and said, "Your father will take good care of you." Now, he adjusted his glasses, avoided my eyes, and said, "Ellie, these things take time. The market's volatile. Your father's been acting in good faith." "Good faith," I said, voice steady. "Then, why hasn't a single dollar been released?" "The trust specifies quarterly disbursements starting at age 25, with no discretion required. Just automatic transfer." He cleared his throat. "Well, there have been administrative fees, management costs. Your father felt it prudent to retain a fiduciary advisor." I asked for the ledger. Reluctantly, he pulled a binder from a locked drawer. Page after page of entries, monthly charges of $1,200, labeled Trust Oversight Services, signed off by my father as trustee. No invoices, no firm name, just his initials R.E. and dates stretching back to my 18th birthday. 8 years, nearly $115,000 siphoned out under the guise of fees that, according to the original trust document I'd since reread 3 times, were explicitly prohibited. The trustee was allowed to reimburse reasonable expenses, not draw a salary. I copied every page, scanned them on my phone right there at his desk, while he shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Your father is a respected man in this community," he murmured. "This could be messy." "I'm not here to be popular," I said. "I'm here to be accurate." But before I could process what I'd just uncovered, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my cousin Lena. "Dad told everyone you stole money from the wedding gift fund. Said you're unstable and trying to extort the family. They're calling you a liar." Then another. "Asterisk, my landlord just told me I'm behind on rent, even though I paid on time. He said your dad mentioned you might be having financial trouble and to keep an eye out." Just like that, 2 threats collided. The financial theft I'd spent years too intimidated to verify, and the social sabotage I'd been trained to fear. They weren't just taking my inheritance, they were isolating me, painting me as unstable, unreliable, greedy. The same playbook they'd used on my mother. discredit the victim so the abuse looks like drama. That night, I sat on my floor with printouts spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. The trust violations, the police report, Aunt Me's letter, the time-stamped video. I felt the walls closing in not physically, but socially, financially, emotionally. I thought about deleting everything, walking away, letting them keep their narrative, their money, their perfect family illusion. It would be easier, safer. But then I remembered the dent in the wall, the way my sister wouldn't look at me, the pearl button I'd found in the crack. This wasn't just about me. It was about every time a woman in our bloodline had been told her truth was inconvenient. So instead of folding, I called the one person I hadn't dared contact yet. A probate attorney I'd found through a survivors network online, specializing in elder and familial financial abuse. No ties to our family, no loyalty to reputation. Her name was Priya Mehta. I emailed her everything, and then I did something I'd never done before. I asked for help without apologizing for needing it. I can't do this alone, I said when she called back that evening, voice cracking only once. But I refused to do nothing. She was quiet for a beat. Then, meet me at the county recorder's office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring your ID, your mother's death certificate, and every document you have. We're not just reviewing the trust, we're going to audit it. All of it. As I hung up, I looked out my window at the city lights, blinking like distant stars. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who ruined the wedding. I felt like the woman who was finally ready to reclaim what was stolen. Not just the money, but the right to be believed. And tomorrow, I wouldn't be walking into an office alone. I'd be walking in with receipts and a witness. The county recorder's office smelled of old paper, lemon-scented disinfectant, and the faint metallic tang of copy machines that had been running since the Reagan administration. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat beside Priya Mehta, sharp-eyed, calm-voiced, wearing a charcoal suit that said, "I've seen this before, and I never lose," while she handed the clerk a formal records request stamped with her law firm's seal. We weren't there for gossip or guesses. We were there for the unchangeable. Ink on paper, signatures in wet ink, dates that couldn't be faked. What we pulled wasn't just one document. It was a trail. First, the original trust filed in 2005, signed by my mother, witnessed, notarized. Clear language. Principal and accumulated interest shall be dispersed quarterly to beneficiary Alina Grace Evans beginning on her 25th birthday. Trustee shall incur no personal fees, reasonable third-party expenses only, with prior court approval. My father's name appeared only as successor trustee, not as a beneficiary. He was a steward, not an owner. Then came the kicker. Buried in the probate annex's digital archive, cross-referenced with the county clerk's physical deed vault, was a document dated November 3, 2021. A trust amendment and fiduciary reallocation, bearing what looked like my mother's signature, granting my father discretionary withdrawal rights for administrative oversight. But my mother died in August 2018. Priya didn't flinch. She simply turned to the clerk. "Can we verify the notary's commission on this?" The clerk typed, frowned, then shook her head. Notary expired in 2019. This was filed under a revoked seal. But Priya wasn't done. She'd come prepared with a forensic detail I hadn't even considered: my mother's Parkinson's diagnosis. By 2017, her handwriting had developed a distinct tremor, a fine, jagged wavering on the downstrokes, documented in her medical records, and visible in every note she wrote that year. The signature on the 2021 amendment: smooth, confident, practically calligraphic. "No tremor," Priya said quietly, pointing to the scan on the screen. "Your mother's hand didn't work that way by 2017, let alone 3 years after her death. This is a forgery." I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for 8 years. Priya moved fast. That afternoon, she filed 3 things simultaneously: an emergency petition to remove my father as trustee, a motion to freeze all trust assets pending investigation, and a formal complaint with the State Bar's Fiduciary Misconduct Division. She also submitted the forged document, the original trust, and my mother's neurological records to the district attorney's financial crimes unit, alongside Aunt Mee's affidavit and my police report, now reclassified as part of a broader pattern of coercive control. 2 days later, the court granted the emergency freeze. The bank confirmed that $28,320 in unauthorized withdrawals had been made since my 25th birthday alone. And then came the call I never expected, from Officer Diaz at the precinct. "The DA's office reviewed your case," she said. "They're reopening the assault file, not just as a standalone incident, but as part of a documented campaign of intimidation tied to financial exploitation. They want to talk about pressing charges." I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the stack of stamped, certified documents Priya had given me, each one a legal brick in a wall I was finally building around myself. The same system that once felt too vast, too indifferent, too stacked in favor of men like my father, had bent toward truth when given undeniable proof. This wasn't vengeance. It was verification. And as I placed the latest receipt, the court's freeze order, into my growing file, I touched the pearl button I now kept taped inside the folder's front cover. Not as a relic of the past, but as a compass. Because when the truth is written in ink that can't be erased, even the most powerful man in the room can't make you disappear. I didn't want a showdown. Not really. Part of me still hoped for a private reckoning, a quiet conversation where he'd finally see the damage, apologize, and we could begin the long, awkward work of rebuilding something honest. But after the freeze order hit and the DA reopened the case, the family exploded. Group texts turned into blame circles. My uncle called me a gold-digging grifter. My cousin posted a vague Instagram story about family betrayal with a broken heart emoji. And my father, he sent a single email through his lawyer. Cease all defamatory actions or face litigation. That's when I knew this wouldn't end in whispers. It needed witnesses. So I requested a family resolution meeting through the courthouse's civil mediation program. Neutral space, no alcohol, no cameras, just chairs in a sunlit community room with a licensed mediator present. I didn't frame it as an accusation. I framed it as clarity. For the sake of our shared history, the invitation read, I invite you to review the facts together so we can each choose our path forward with eyes open. To my surprise, most of them came. Maybe out of guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe just fear of being left out of the narrative. They filed in awkwardly, uncles in blazers they hadn't worn since funerals, aunts clutching purses like shields, cousins scrolling on phones to avoid my gaze. My father sat in the back, arms crossed, jaw tight, radiating the same cold fury he'd worn at the wedding. My sister lingered near the doorway, pale and trembling, until I caught her eye and gave the tiniest nod. She walked over and sat beside me. The room hummed with tension, the kind that crackles before a storm. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted in their seat. Then I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply placed 3 folders on the long oak table, each labeled in clean, black font. Police report. Trust fraud. Elder affidavit. This isn't about the wedding, I began, voice low but steady, carrying in the quiet room. That moment was just the tip of something much deeper. For years, I was told my discomfort was drama, my boundaries were disrespect, and my questions were betrayal. But the truth isn't subjective. It's documented. I opened the first folder and laid out the time-stamped still of the wall dent. This is what happened when I tried to speak up at a joyous event. Then the second, the forged trust amendment beside my mother's final handwritten grocery list, her tremor unmistakable. This is what happened to her money, and by extension, mine. Finally, the third, Aunt Me's notarized letter, her elegant script describing my mother's fear, her isolation, her silence. I looked around the table at the faces I'd known my whole life, now shadowed with confusion, shame, or denial. You all had choices, I said. You could have asked questions when tuition never came through. You could have noticed that Mom stopped talking about grad school. You could have said something when he called me ungrateful for wanting independence. But you didn't. You chose comfort over courage. And in doing so, you let him rewrite our family's history. My father stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt, he snapped. You're twisting things to paint me as a monster. No, I said, meeting his eyes without flinching. I'm just nomming what's already there. You don't get to call it love when it leaves scars. And then silence. Not the kind that follows anger, but the kind that follows truth. My aunt wiped her eyes. My uncle stared at his hands. My sister reached over and squeezed my knee under the table. In that moment, the room didn't erupt. It unraveled, and for the first time, the silence wasn't mine to carry alone. I let the silence sit for a long moment, thick, heavy, charged with everything no one had ever dared say out loud. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope sealed with red wax, the same as Aunt Mee's. Inside was a formal notice from the district attorney's office, a copy of my civil protective order petition, and a letter I'd written myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents would speak for themselves. "I'm not here to debate," I said, placing the envelope in the center of the table. "I'm here to inform. As of this morning, I filed for a civil protective order against Robert Evans for assault and emotional intimidation. I've also authorized the DA to pursue misdemeanor assault charges based on the wedding incident, and to include the trust fraud as evidence of a pattern of coercive control." A murmur rippled through the room. My father's face went white, then red, his fingers curling into fists. "You're taking this to court, over a shove. After everything I've done for you, everything you've taken asterisk, I corrected gently, is what's going to court." Then I did what I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head, but never thought I'd have the courage to do in front of them all. I stood, turned on the small Bluetooth speaker I'd brought, and played the full 47-second clip, not the viral snippet, but the complete sequence from the wedding live stream. The gasps were audible when his voice, though muffled, carried clearly through the speakers. "Say one word, and I'll cut you off forever." When it ended, I picked up Aunt Mee's letter. "And now, I'll read something else you've never heard." In a calm, clear voice, the same one my mother used when she read bedtime stories, I read every word of her 2009 affidavit. How my father had intercepted my mother's acceptance letter to a graduate program. How he'd insisted she sign over her small inheritance to protect it from her impulsiveness. How, after she miscarried their second child, he told her, "Maybe if you weren't so selfish, you'd be able to hold onto what matters." I watched my family's faces shift, disbelief melting into dawning horror, then shame. My sister covered her mouth with her hand. One of my uncles turned away, staring out the window like he couldn't bear to look at his own brother. When I finished, I placed the letter down and looked directly at my father. "This isn't drama, it's documentation. And from this moment forward, every interaction between us will be through legal counsel, in writing, with timestamps and records. If you contact me directly, it's a violation of the protective order. If you speak about me to family members to sway opinion, I'll add it to my evidence log. This isn't punishment, it's accountability." He opened his mouth to argue, but the mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Lynn, raised her hand. "Mr. Evans, the court takes coercive control seriously. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern. And your daughter has provided verified, time-stamped proof." My father looked around the room then, not for support, but for escape. But there was none. Even his usual allies sat frozen, avoiding his eyes. The man who had commanded every room for 30 years suddenly had nowhere to hide. I gathered my folders, my voice softer now, but no less firm. I loved you. I wanted to believe you were protecting me. But love doesn't erase your autonomy. Love doesn't steal your future. And love, I said, pausing at the door, doesn't leave dents in the wall and call it discipline. As I walked out, my sister followed. No one stopped us. No one spoke. Behind me, the truth sat on the table, not shouted, not weaponized, just laid bare, in black and white, for anyone brave enough to read it. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble columns or gilded ceilings, just pale green walls, scuffed linoleum floors, and folding chairs that creaked when you shifted. But in that quiet, fluorescent-lit room on a Tuesday morning in late July, something monumental happened. The system didn't just acknowledge me, it validated me. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing, had reviewed the file the night before. She didn't need theatrics. She needed facts. And we had them. The police report with its time-stamped video still. The forensic comparison of my mother's handwriting versus the forged trust amendment. The bank ledger showing $28,320 in unauthorized withdrawals after my 25th birthday. And most damning, the affidavit from Aunt Me, now notarized again under oath during a video deposition. Her voice frail but unwavering as she swore to what she'd witnessed decades ago. My father's attorney had tried to dismiss it all as family disagreement and misinterpreted discipline. But the judge cut him off with a single question. If this was a neighbor who shoved your client and drained her trust, would you call it a disagreement? The room went still. The ruling came swiftly. The civil protective order was granted for 2 years. No contact, no proximity within 500 feet. All communication restricted to written correspondence through attorneys. Then the financial reversal. The court removed my father as trustee immediately, appointed a neutral third-party fiduciary from the state bar's approved list, and ordered full restitution of all unauthorized withdrawals, $114,720 in total, to be repaid within 18 months, or converted to a court-enforced lien against his assets. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the language. The judge didn't say alleged. She said documented. She didn't say misunderstanding. She said pattern of coercive control. And when she looked at me, she said, "Ms. Evans, your diligence in preserving evidence has not only protected your rights, it sets a precedent for how these cases can be resolved with clarity, not chaos." Outside the courthouse, sunlight drenched the sidewalk like forgiveness. My sister hugged me so tight I could feel her tears soaking into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner," she whispered. I was scared too. I held her and thought of my mother, how she'd walked these same streets, maybe, after one of his discussions, head down, holding her purse like armor. She never got this moment. But because I had her records, her handwriting, her silence translated into proof, her truth lived on in the ruling. Later that day, the new trustee called. The first disbursement from my education trust, $12,500, had been processed and would hit my account by morning. It wasn't just money. It was autonomy. It was the future my mother had set aside for me, finally released from the prison of his control. I sat on my fire escape that evening, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, and ran my thumb over the pearl button I now kept on my keychain. It no longer felt like a relic of loss. It felt like a compass, one that had guided me through the storm and into a space where truth didn't need volume to be heard. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in a stamped court order, a cleared bank balance, and the quiet certainty that you are no longer someone else's secret to keep. The fallout wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies portray it, with slammed doors and screaming matches. It was quieter, slower, more surgical. Like watching a photograph fade in reverse, colors leaching away not all at once, but detail by detail, until only outlines remain. Within a week of the court ruling, my father listed his house, the one he'd bragged about as the Evans legacy, and moved to a modest rental 2 states away. No farewell dinner, no final plea, just a forwarded address on a change of address form sent to the post office, cold and administrative, as if he were erasing himself before anyone else could. I heard through a cousin that he told people I'd turned on the family for money, that the court had been manipulated by a sob story. But the story had receipts, and receipts don't lie. The family group chat once a torrent of birthday wishes, vacation photos, and passive-aggressive commentary about who hadn't called grandma went silent. Then, like a slow tide, it fractured. 3 aunts blocked me outright. 2 uncles sent stiff, formal messages. We hope you find peace. But 5 others, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, my mother's childhood friend, even my estranged half-uncle from Dad's first marriage reached out privately. Not with excuses, but with confessions. I saw him do the same to your mom at Christmas 2007. I said nothing, because I didn't want to ruin the meal. He threatened to cut me off when I asked about the trust. I backed down. I'm sorry. I believed him when he said you were unstable. I won't make that mistake again. Their words didn't heal everything, but they lifted a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. The lie that I was alone in seeing what he was. My sister and I started something small, a private fund for relatives who'd also been silenced or financially manipulated by him. We called it the Me and Margaret Circle, after our grandmother and mother. No fanfare, no public posts, just a secure account where those who'd been cut off could apply for emergency support, rent, therapy copays, bus tickets to leave unsafe situations with no questions, no judgment. It began with 3 people. Within 2 months, it was 9. Meanwhile, the 5 million viewers hadn't just watched. They'd acted. Domestic violence hotlines reported a 17% spike in calls referencing the wedding video. A nonprofit reached out to feature my anonymous case in a training module for judges on coercive control in familial settings. And a woman in Oregon sent me a letter saying she'd filed for guardianship over her aging mother after seeing how financial abuse could hide behind care. This wasn't fame, it was ripple. Of course, there were losses. I missed my great-aunt's 90th birthday because half the family wouldn't attend if I was there. I'll never get back the years I spent doubting myself, shrinking my voice, apologizing for existing too loudly. And sometimes, late at night, I still flinch when a man raises his hand too quickly, even if it's just a wave. But here's what the fallout also gave me: clarity. I learned who truly valued me, not for my compliance, but for my truth. I learned that legacy isn't a house or a name. It's the courage to break the cycle. And I learned that when you choose integrity over illusion, you don't lose your family. You just finally meet the people who are always in it. 6 weeks after the court order, an envelope arrived not through legal channels, but hand-addressed in my father's familiar looping script, the one he used for birthday cards and holiday donations. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the weight of it, or the way the paper smelled faintly of his cologne, sandalwood, and regret. Or maybe, after so many years of wanting him to see me, a sliver of me still hoped he finally had. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from a counseling center specializing in anger management and coercive behavior. At the bottom, a handwritten note: I've enrolled in the 12-week program. Court didn't require it. I'm doing it anyway. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying. I stared at those words for a long time. Not because I believed them instantly. After a lifetime of performance, trust wasn't something I could hand out like a party favor, but because they represented a choice. His choice, not forced by a judge, not coerced by public shame, but offered, however imperfectly, as a gesture. I called Priya first. Don't respond directly, she advised. If you want to acknowledge it, do it through a boundary. Make it clear that goodwill isn't the same as access. So I drafted a letter, not angry, not sentimental, just precise. I thanked him for taking the step, affirmed that healing was possible, and then laid out the only terms under which future contact could ever occur: completion of the full program with written verification from his counselor, no discussion of finances, family history, or my choices, and all communication limited to one handwritten letter per quarter, sent through my attorney for screening. No calls, no visits, no just checking in. I closed with, grace isn't a passageway back into my life. It's the space I leave open in case you become someone worthy of walking through it. But the door remains locked until you prove, through consistent action, not words, that you understand why it was closed in the first place. I never expected a reply, and I didn't get one. Months later, I heard through a distant cousin that he'd finished the program, that he'd started volunteering at a men's accountability group, that he'd sold his car to begin repaying the restitution, even though the court had given him 18 months. I didn't verify it. I didn't need to. His actions were no longer my responsibility to monitor. What mattered was this: I offered a path not to reconciliation, but to redemption on his own terms, far from my emotional landscape. And in doing so, I freed myself from the last thread of hope that had kept me tethered to his version of love. Because grace without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. And I'd spent enough of my life disappearing so someone else could feel whole. Now my grace had teeth and a lock, and that was exactly as it should be. A year to the day after the wedding, the same golden hour, the same angle of sun slanting through the trees, I stood on the steps of a modest community center on the edge of the city, not in a blush silk dress, but in a tailored navy suit, my mother's pearl button now pinned just above my heart like a quiet medal. Inside, a room full of advocates, survivors, and policy advisors listened as I testified before the state's domestic abuse task force, sharing my story not as a spectacle, but as a case study in how coercive control hides in plain sight, especially in families that pride themselves on keeping things civil. Afterward, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "My dad did the same thing," she whispered, "at my graduation. He grabbed my arm and said, 'Smile, or you'll look ungrateful.' I thought I was the only one." I handed her a card with the me and Margaret Circle's secure contact info and said, "You're not alone, and your truth doesn't need permission to exist." That night, I drove out to the shelter I'd quietly partnered with since the court ruling, the one that now housed a newly launched adult family survivor wing, funded in part by the first disbursement from my trust. The wall I'd been slammed into at the wedding, it no longer existed. The venue had renovated, and in its place now stood a sunlit mural painted by residents, a tree with deep roots and broken chains at its base, its branches holding open hands instead of leaves. Beneath it, in simple script, "What was taken in silence is returned in truth." I ran my fingers over the painted bark, remembering the cold marble, the dent, the way my breath had vanished in that moment. Now, that same space held light, color, testimony. My pain hadn't been erased, but it had been repurposed. Back home, I sorted through a box of my mother's things I'd finally allowed myself to open. Among old photos and report cards, I found a small velvet pouch. Inside were 3 pearl buttons, identical to the one I carried. Tucked beneath them, a note in her handwriting. "For my girls. When the world tries to unfasten you, remember, you decide what stays closed and what opens." I cried then, not from grief, but from awe. She'd known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. And she'd left us tools, not just trinkets. Now, when I pass a jar of loose buttons at a thrift store, I don't see remnants of the past. I see potential. A future where healing isn't about returning to what was, but stitching something new from what remains. I still flinch sometimes at raised voices, sudden movements, the scent of his cologne on a stranger. But I no longer confuse safety with silence, and I no longer mistake endurance for strength. True strength is walking into a room after being told you don't belong and placing your truth on the table like a document that cannot be revoked. The buttons are still my motif, but now I wear them not to hold myself together, but to remind myself that I am already whole. I used to think healing meant forgiveness, that to move forward, I had to soften the edges of what he did, to call it complicated, or a product of his upbringing, to make room for his remorse so I could feel like a good daughter again. But I've learned something quieter, truer. Healing isn't about absolving the harm. It's about refusing to let it define your future. You don't have to pardon the wound to stop letting it bleed. If you're watching this, if your hands are shaking, because something in my story echoed your own, please know this. Your pain is valid even if there were no bruises. Your truth matters even if it happened at a wedding, a graduation, a holiday dinner. Coercive control doesn't always leave marks on the skin. It leaves them on the soul. And those scars count. Don't wait for a viral video to prove you're not crazy. Start where you are. Save the text. Screenshot the email. Note the date, the time, the exact words. Find the elder who remembers. There's almost always one, tucked away in a quiet house, waiting for someone brave enough to ask. And never let family become a cage that locks you in with your abuser while calling it love. I've linked a free redacted toolkit in the description, templates for documenting financial control, a script for talking to attorneys, a checklist for preserving digital evidence, all built from what I wish I known. It's not legal advice. It's a lifeline. Use it. Share it. Pass it like a button from one trembling hand to another. Because the next time someone says, "But it's your father," or "It's just how he is," or "You're overreacting," you'll have more than feelings. You'll have receipts. And receipts, when gathered with courage and clarity, become revolution. My story didn't end at the wedding. It began there. And if yours is just starting, I'm already proud of you for choosing to believe yourself. Stay safe. Stay documented. And if you're ready, tap share. Someone out there needs to see that walking away with your truth intact is the most powerful kind of return.